I'm Jerry Gordon here with a colleague from the New English Review, a fellow senior editor, Ibn Warraq. Ibn is a truly scholar, an independent thinker, and a wide-ranging critic of what we would consider as the canon of Islamic literature, among other things. But Ibn, you had a comment to make earlier in our offline discussions about what you'd rather be doing than what you are doing currently. What is that?
Well, I'd much rather be reading the great works of Western civilization, listening to Mozart or reading Dickens and George Eliot or Henry James, instead of having to worry all the time about jihad and Sharia and all these incredibly boring, mind-numbing nonsense. I have two projects. One is Koranic criticism, but of the more philological kind than the popular kind, which wants to know what it says about virgins in the Quran, which really doesn't interest me whatsoever. What I mean is the origins of the Quran, the language of the Quran, where the various stories actually come from. Right. That's one aspect which I do find fascinating, which is intellectually really exhilarating. When you feel you're really getting nearer to the truth, and it's very exciting. Any kind of research like that is very exciting. The other is the defense of Western civilization, which is under attack. We in the West are on the defensive, apologetic, kind of masochism that we've learned. I don't know. We've always been like this in a sense. In one of my articles in my new collection, Virgins What Virgins,
right,
I talk about this self-flagellation that, for example, was there soon after the First World War. We were blaming ourselves for the Treaty of Versailles, and we were blaming the Treaty of Versailles for the rise of Hitler and so on. And we tend to have this masochistic tendency. So one of the glories of the West, or Western civilization, is self-criticism. They're able to look at their weaknesses and errors and so on, and then they go about rectifying these errors. But it does also lead to extremes. Like you get the insane, obsessive hatred developed in writers like Noam Chomsky and Michael Moore, and journalists like Robert Fisk. It goes to the other extreme. I mean, self-criticism is one thing, but self-hatred is just so it's not acceptable.
Why do you think this lack of this obsession about self-criticism and the promulgation of self-hatred by some people take to be important observers in the West is prevalent?
Why is it prevalent?
Yeah.
Well, some part of it, of course, in the West, particularly in Europe, which has a legacy of colonialism.
Right.
So there's the post-colonial guilt, which has left them rather defenseless. They feel that they should apologize. They have done a whole generation of colonial subjects an injustice, and that we should pay for it. But they too tend to exaggerate, perhaps. They refuse to look at. It's perfectly legitimate to criticize Western slavery, the enslavement of black Africans.
Mm-hmm.
But they refuse. You cannot, in France, for example, you cannot discuss the Arab enslavement of not only Africans, but in fact whites from northern Europe.
Right.
They went on their slave raiding expeditions. But it is totally unacceptable in modern France to discuss the contributions of the Arabs to the slave trade, which was often, in fact, much more inhumane, because it included the castration of the slaves, because they were needed for the harems throughout the Near East.
Isn't it, there's a term in Arabic called abed, which is synonymous with black, but it also means slave, doesn't it?
Yes. Like Abdullah, slave
right.
of God. Yes,
right.
Yes.
What is it that you believe could be the beginnings of the pushback against a combination of this unfortunate alliance in the West between these self-haters of Western values and essentially the rollback at the periphery of what we call the Islamic world?
How can we recover our self-respect? I think
that's a good way of characterizing it.
That would be education, but unfortunately our major institutions of higher education have been taken over by or have been under the influence of the writings of people like Edward Said,
mm-hmm.
who have made it almost impossible to discuss the Middle East without being accused of Islamophobia or of Orientalism, which has acquired a pejorative sense.
Right.
It was merely a descriptive term, a neutral descriptive term for any expert who studied the Orient. So that would be, in other words, if we were to relativize, if we show that that slavery has been present in every civilization,
mm-hmm.
it was awful, but it was the West who went about trying to eradicate it, whereas the Muslims have never been at the forefront of the fight against slavery. There is, to this day, there's slavery in the Middle East,
right?
I think it was David Jacobs who had extraordinary video footage of black slaves being auctioned in the Sudan in the 1990s.
Right.
So that's one kind of relativism which I favor. Relativism comes in two forms, like cholesterol, good and bad. And this is good in that it shows that we did awful things in the West, but because of our self-criticism, we were able to do something about it. What is lacking in the Middle East, in the Islamic countries, is any kind of self-criticism. They put the blame always on some Western Zionist conspiracy. They refuse to take any responsibility for their own malaise or for their own problems.